The first step in every single live edge build is cleaning up the slab, and then we also have to address this massive hole. We will be filling this with epoxy, and this is why we're building the foam here. We will tape off this hole and hope it doesn't leak, but the foam is just for insurance, and guys, spoiler alert, we need it. Next we are mixing our epoxy. This is a 2-to-1 river set epoxy I have never used before. I have to use it right now because I have it so long already that it's about to expire. Let's just hope it cures nice and hard. So we're using a black pigment paste from Health of Mind Art. I prefer using the black pigment paste over dyes because the pigment paste actually doesn't stain the wood, but the dyes do heavily, and with this camper we obviously have to be careful. After we have everything nicely mixed, we're gonna go and do our first pour. Literally freaking forgot to put the freaking mold radius on. How dumb am I? That was just plain stupid, but it seems like it's not seeping, so that's good. Yes, so this is already our first issue. I forgot to put mold release on the bottom, but if the tape and everything works, then we shouldn't have any problems. But as I hinted already, it really doesn't. So the next day I came in and looked at the pour and I saw there was a massive leak, so I propped it up so that it doesn't stick to the mold and we don't have a massive piece of melamine sticking to our slab. But it created a whole lot of mess and now we have to clean it up. So the reason why we are removing all those little droplets around the opening there is we have to create a new seal with our tough tape from Health of Mind Art. So what happened before is I had some sheathing tape that was really old and I think it didn't stick anymore properly, and this is why we had this massive leak. So now I double and triple taped it so that we have absolutely no leak. I also created a barrier of cork around it that should help as well. Now we're repeating all the steps that we did before with our epoxy. We mix it thoroughly and we use again our pigment paste from Health of Mind Art that makes it nice and black. Oh my god, it's so much heavier now. So, and while the epoxy is curing, we are dressing the legs. My idea was to have 3 square pine legs. The front leg will be cut in 45 degrees and the back legs in 60 degrees, which should give us a little bit of a tripod situation there, and the slabs should be nice and stable. So my first idea was to stain them. This is why we are sending them to 220 grit. And the stain we chose here was a dark walnut, which I thought would turn out great, but it didn't. So while they were drying and I was thinking about what to do with them, we went back to our slab. The epoxy is cured hard 3 days later and we are ready to demold. And okay, let's see. As I said, it was the tape, there was no user error beforehand. This time everything went alright. I never make user errors. Well, anyway, thank God we didn't lose again $200 worth of epoxy. Now we're cleaning up the slab to make it ready for the flattening process.
Oh wow, this is full of epoxy.
Guys, let's see.
Wow, it actually looks okay. That actually looks okay.
So we're starting our flattening process, and what I'm trying to do is to get one surface as flat as possible so that I can turn it around, shim it, and then go over it with the router sled. This always makes a huge mess. I'm trying to get the dust collection going on it, but it is actually quite hard. So I'm currently designing a height adjustable router sled with dust collection, and guys, struggling. Anyway, so I'm using what I have at the moment. It is not pretty, but it works. After we are sanding out the router marks with our Bosch GET 75150, we have to make a decision what we are gonna do with this table. And for that, we're gonna jump into our live session.
I decided to pivot. Okay, so we're changing the concept of this table. And as you know, this table or this slab was a burn victim. I thought, why not embrace this idea? And we incorporated the burnt look into this slab and into this table.
This can't be what? Be real?
I've decided to embrace the history of this slab and to remember what happened so that we don't make the same mistakes again. But more on that later in this video. For now, we have decided to burn the live edge of the slab and completely burn the legs to crisp and encase them in epoxy. So after we burned the live edge, we had to address a soft spot on top of the slab that was very porous. So what I'm doing here is I'm gonna fill that with penetrating epoxy, and I made this penetrating epoxy myself. I just used tabletop epoxy and put in isopropyl alcohol so it's super thin and it soaks into the wood. And because the slab needs 24 hours to cure, we're going back to our legs and we are starting to burn those to crisp. And yes, I probably should have done that outside. It was a little bit dangerous to do that inside, but I got it well ventilated and I had my fire extinguisher right next to me. And I don't mean that piece of paper, the real fire extinguisher. But look at that, nice and burned, looks awesome. So now we need to do this on every single side for every single leg and try not to drop them. The next step is gonna be the penetrated epoxy for our leg. I wanna stabilize the burnt surface, so once I pour the tabletop epoxy on top of it, it doesn't create a ton of bubbles and it stays nice and clear. So again, we are making our own penetrated epoxy with this tabletop epoxy and isopropyl alcohol to make it super thin. And then we just brush it onto the leg so it soaks nicely in. Pro tip guys, don't put too much on. Once it gets really shiny and the wood doesn't soak it in anymore, it actually cures on top of the wood and it creates a ton of bubbles, and this is the process where we are trying to avoid that. Now we are putting on our first flat coat of our tabletop epoxy. We're using our Health of Mind Art tabletop epoxy, which cures super hard, has usually almost no bubbles. This is a bit complicated because we have to do 4 sides. And because of that, there's some driplets going down the sides, and you will see later on that will cause some issues. So I'm slowly seeing the light in the end of the tunnel. I'm sanding the top here to 220 grit, popping the grain in between grits.
Wow, that's gonna look so freaking awesome, guys.
Yeah, the slab looks beautiful. I keep setting the top and filling in cracks with our CA glue, and then I'm starting the finishing process. I wanted to finish this one with polyurethane. Why? Don't ask me questions, it's my table, I'm trying to do it. This polyurethane was lying around in my shop, also for quite some time. And the first coat didn't look that great. So I did some research and everyone says the same, the first coat never looks great. So I've sanded it off with a 320 grit and then I put another coat on top of it. And then I did it again because it didn't look great. And then I did it again because it still didn't look great. And then I did it again about 6 or 7 times. And I was hoping that it would be a glitch in the matrix and Mr. Smith would come into my shop and shoot me in my head.
Deja vu.
Okay, so we had to park this project for about 2 months because of some commission work, some other commitments I had to do beforehand. So the next steps before we mount the legs onto our tabletop, we're gonna sand everything off, everything flat, and start polishing it so that we have this nice glass finish, and then we're gonna mount the legs and hopefully we'll finish in this table very soon.
So I'm sanding off all the driblets that came down on the side with 120 grit. We unfortunately or fortunately sanded off the tabletop epoxy a little bit there and it looks freaking fantastic. I love it. Sometimes those happy accidents just happen. So those driblets though, as I mentioned before, are a bit of a problem because we do have some bubbles forming there, and when I sanded it off, all those bubbles were exposed and I had to fill them in. After 120 grit, I decided to put another super thin epoxy coat on top of it just to make the sanding process a little easier, and it filled in all the cracks and imperfections as well. We started sanding with 320 grits and we go all the way up to 5000 grit, and we start wet sanding at 500. Once we are at 5000 grit, it's already super shiny and nice and feels super smooth. But that's nothing compared to the next process we're doing, which is the polishing process. So we are using a 3-compound polishing process from Health of Mind Art. Compound 1 is the rough polish that we're using with the wool pad that is super rough, then a really hard yellow pad, and then we're going to the second compound, which is the fine polishing compound, where we're using a very soft pad, and then the third compound is an oil protector, which gives it that insane sheen and clarity.
Okay guys, so obviously we have an issue now because that's not standing by itself. I want to get a support brace on it like this. So then it can stand there and then I can glue it on with epoxy. So I'm gonna use the double-sided tape trick to fix that up.
The 5-minute epoxy has a weight limit of about 75 kilos, which is not humongous. But I think it's gonna be fine for this table. I'm also using CA glue with activator just to hold it in place so it doesn't move around until the epoxy cures. So, moment of truth guys, will the table hold? It's heavy, alright? Yes! Woo! It holds.
Okay, so after 1,000,001 changes to the table design, we finally glued on the legs with 5-minute epoxy, and that actually worked pretty well. I sat on the table and it didn't break. Awesome. I'm not gonna do it again, but it worked. So the next step is we're gonna sand the top and then we finish everything off and then we are done with this table.
Yeah, and as you probably guessed, I'm not gonna use freaking polyurethane again. I'm gonna use my trusty Rubio monocoat. Best finish on the planet. I'm loving it. It looks amazing, it's so easy to apply, and it has amazing protection. The only thing you have to remember with Rubio monocoat is you have to wipe off every bit of excess that you can find. Rubio says you can't wipe too much off, but you can leave too much on.
So, this table is now in its final resting place. And if you're still here, why didn't you hit the like button? If you want to see how I took on a furniture giant, click on this video next. And as always, I appreciate you and I'll see you next time.